morning had not been kind to Maria Delgado. It had started the way most of her mornings started lately, with the sound of her youngest daughter, Rosie, crying softly from the small cot in the corner of the room. Not the loud, demanding cry of a child wanting attention. It was the quiet, exhausted kind. The kind that meant she was hungry again. The kind that broke something deep in Maria's chest every single time she heard it. Maria had been awake for an hour already, lying still on the mattress with her eyes open, staring at a water stain on the ceiling that had slowly grown larger over the past 3 weeks. She had been doing math in her head. The same math she had been doing every morning for the past 4 months. It never came out to a good number. Rent was $200 short. The electric bill had a red warning notice taped to the front door. The refrigerator held half a carton of eggs, a nearly empty jar of peanut butter, and a bottle of ketchup. Her 2 boys, 14-year-old Marcus and 11-year-old Danny, were sleeping on a fold-out sofa in the living room. She could hear Marcus breathing slowly, still deep in sleep. He had stayed up late again, she knew, because he had been trying to fix the leak under the kitchen sink using a video he watched on someone else's phone at school. He had not fixed it, but he had tried. That was the kind of boy Marcus was. He never stopped trying. Maria sat up and pulled her cardigan around her shoulders. The apartment was cold. She had turned the heating down as low as it would go, but even the lowest setting cost money. She put her feet on the floor, felt the cold of the linoleum seep through her socks, and stood up. She went to the kitchen first. She cracked 2 eggs into a pan with a small amount of oil, and made a plate for Rosie and Danny. She gave Marcus the last of the bread with peanut butter. For herself, she had nothing. She was not hungry. Or rather, she had taught herself not to feel it anymore. Not until the children were fed. That was a rule she had made for herself months ago, and she kept it without fail. While the children ate, Maria went to the bedroom and opened the small drawer of the nightstand beside her mattress. Inside, wrapped in a square of soft cloth, was a gold ring. She had not opened this drawer in 6 weeks. She had been pretending the ring was not there, because every time she looked at it, she thought about her mother, and thinking about her mother right now was something she could not afford to do, not if she needed to keep moving. The ring had belonged to Irene Delgado, Maria's mother, who had worn it every day of her adult life until the day she passed away 4 years ago. It was a simple gold band with a small oval setting that held a pale green stone. It was not worth a great deal of money in any jeweler's estimate, but it was the only thing Maria had kept from her mother's house. Everything else had been sold or given away during those hard months after the funeral, when Maria was trying to keep her own household from falling apart. She had always told herself she would never sell this ring. She had told herself this clearly and firmly, the way you tell yourself things you know might one day be tested. Today was that day. She wrapped it back in the cloth, closed her hand around it, and stood in the middle of her bedroom for a long moment. The sounds from the kitchen reached her. Danny saying something that made Rosie giggle, the scraping of a spoon against a bowl. She pressed the ring tight in her palm. Then she walked back to the kitchen, helped Rosie wipe her face, put on her coat, and got the children ready to go. She had decided to take them with her because she had no choice. There was no one to leave them with. The neighbor across the hall, an older woman named Connie, had gone to visit her sister in another city 3 days ago. Maria had no family nearby. The friends she'd had when her husband Carl was still around had slowly drifted away over the past 6 months, the way people sometimes do when they sense trouble and don't know what to say. She didn't blame them. She just didn't call them anymore. Carl had left in February. He had not left with a fight or a scene. He had simply packed a bag one evening while the children were asleep, and told Maria he was not happy, that he had not been happy for a long time, and that he needed to go. She had stood in the hallway and watched him walk to the door. She had asked him where he was going. He said he wasn't sure. She asked him about the children. He said he would send money when he could. She asked him when that would be. He said he didn't know. He had sent money once, in March, $200 in a plain envelope with no note. After that, nothing. Maria had taken on extra cleaning shifts at the office building where she worked part-time. She had cut back on groceries, then cut back again. She had sold the television and the small kitchen table. She had sold her winter coat and replaced it with the cardigan. She had applied for assistance and been placed on a waiting list. She had called the assistance office 4 times since then, and been told the same thing each time. She was on the list, and they would be in touch. She had not told anyone how bad things had gotten. Not the school, not the church she used to go to, not a single person. This was partly pride, and she knew it. She had always managed on her own. She had always found a way. The idea of someone looking at her children and seeing poverty felt like something she could not stand. So she smiled when she picked them up from school. She packed their lunches with care. She kept their clothes clean. She held it all together on the outside even as the inside came apart one piece at a time. But now there was nothing left to sell, except the ring. The pawn shop was called Briggs & Sons. It sat on a corner of the main street in their small Texas town, wedged between a hardware store and a dry cleaner. Maria had driven past it many times over the years and never once thought she would go inside. She had always noticed the sign in the window, the faded yellow letters on a black background, and thought of it as a place for other people, other kinds of problems. She parked her car 2 blocks away because the parking near the shop was metered, and she had no coins. She walked the 2 blocks with Marcus beside her, and Danny holding Rosie's hand. The morning was cold and gray, the kind of Texas winter morning that looks nothing like the warm postcards people imagine. The wind came in off the flat land and found every gap in your clothing. Rosie walked quietly. She was 6 years old and small for her age, with dark eyes that were always watching everything. She had her mother's seriousness. She did not complain about the cold. They stopped outside the shop. Maria looked at the door. Through the glass she could see the inside. A counter, glass cases, shelves of items. An old man behind the counter, reading a newspaper. She told Marcus to wait outside on the bench by the hardware store door with his brother and sister. Marcus looked at her face and seemed to understand that something was happening that she did not want to explain right now. He nodded and took Danny and Rosie to the bench. Maria pushed open the door. The bell above it made a small sound. The smell inside was dusty and metallic, the smell of old things and old dealings. The man behind the counter looked up from his newspaper. He was somewhere in his mid-60s, with gray hair and a face that had seen a lot of people come through that door. His name was written on a small placard on the counter, Mr. Briggs. "Morning," he said. Not unkindly, but not warmly either. The neutral voice of a man who dealt in transactions. "Good morning," Maria said. She walked to the counter. She placed her hand flat on the glass, still closed around the ring. Briggs folded his newspaper and waited. Maria opened her hand. She set the ring down on the counter, still wrapped in the cloth. Then she carefully unfolded the cloth so that the ring sat exposed on the glass between them. Briggs leaned forward and looked at it. He pulled a small magnifying glass from beneath the counter and examined it without picking it up. He turned it once with a pen. He looked at the stone. He looked at the band. "Gold?" he asked. "Yes," Maria said. "I don't know the exact carat. It was my mother's." Briggs nodded. He set down the magnifying glass. "It's 9 carat, he said. "Stone's synthetic. Nice piece, but it's not high-end." "I know," Maria said. "I know it's not worth a lot." "I can do $40, Briggs said. He said it carefully, not cruelly, but also without hesitation. It was just a number. Maria looked at the ring on the counter. $40. She had known, roughly, what to expect. Pawn shops gave you a fraction. That was the math. $40 would keep the electric on for 1 more month. It would buy a week of groceries. It would buy her some time. But it was her mother's ring. She stood at the counter and could not make herself speak. Her jaw was tight. She breathed slowly through her nose. She was not going to cry in this shop. She was absolutely not going to do that. "Take your time," Briggs said. He went back to his newspaper. He gave her the space without being asked. That was the act of a man who had seen this kind of moment before. Maria stared at the ring for what felt like a long time. In her mind she could see her mother's hand, the way the ring had always sat on her mother's finger, a little loose in later years, always slightly tilted. Irene Delgado had kept it clean, polished it every Sunday before church. It had never left her finger except once, when she was in the hospital, and she had asked Maria to keep it safe until she came home. She never came home. Maria pressed her lips together. She was thinking about Rosie's face this morning, the quiet way she had cried. She was thinking about the red notice on the electric bill. She was thinking about Marcus eating peanut butter bread in silence because he was trying not to show that he was still hungry. "I'll take the 40, she said. The words came out flat and steady. She was proud of that. She kept her voice completely flat. Then the bell above the door rang. Maria did not turn around right away. She heard the door open, felt the cold come in for a moment, and then the door closed. She heard footsteps, heavy boots on a wooden floor. "Morning, Briggs," said a man's voice, deep and easy, the voice of someone who was not in a hurry. "Morning, Hank," said Briggs. "Your watch is ready. Hold on." Maria kept her eyes on the ring. She was not in the mood for an audience. She did not move. She heard the man, Hank, step up to the other end of the counter. She heard Briggs go to the back room. She stood very still. Then Rosie's voice came through the glass of the front window, high and clear, the way children's voices carry without warning. She was saying something to Danny, and she was loud enough that even inside the shop you could hear it. "Danny, I'm really hungry. Can we eat soon?" The words came through the glass like something physical. Maria felt them in her chest. She closed her eyes for half a second. Behind her, the man named Hank had gone quiet. Maria reached out and put her hand around the ring. Briggs came back from the back room carrying a small paper bag. He set it on the counter on the far side, then looked at Maria. "You ready to go ahead?" he said. Maria opened her mouth. "Don't buy that ring." The voice came from behind her, quiet, certain, not a question. Maria turned around. The man standing at the other end of the counter was large. Not threatening, but large in the way that some men simply take up space. He was tall and broad across the shoulders, with gray at his temples and lines around his eyes that came from years of outdoor living. He wore worn jeans, a flannel shirt, and boots that had seen every kind of weather. He was looking at Briggs, not at Maria. Briggs looked at him, then at Maria, then back at him. "Hank?" "I said don't buy it," Hank said again. He picked up the paper bag with his watch and put it in his jacket pocket. Then, for the first time, he looked directly at Maria. His eyes were calm. Not pitying, not curious, just calm. "Ma'am," he said, "would you be willing to sit with me for a few minutes? There's a diner across the street. I'd like to talk to you about something." Maria looked at him. She had spent 6 months learning to measure strangers very quickly. She looked at his hands, which were large and still. She looked at his face, which was patient. She looked at his eyes, which were asking something genuine. Outside the window, she could see Marcus on the bench, watching the door, watching for her, doing what he always did. "My children are outside," she said. "I see them," Hank said. "They're welcome too." Maria looked at the ring on the counter. Then she picked it up and closed her fingers around it. She looked at Hank one more time, and she said 5 minutes. The diner across the street was called the Corner Cup, and it had been there since before most people in town could remember. It had a green awning that had faded to something close to gray, a long counter with spinning stools, and 6 booths along the window. It smelled the way all good diners smell, coffee and warm bread and the kind of food that has been made in the same kitchen for a very long time. Maria pushed through the door with her children behind her. Marcus came in first, one hand on Rosie's shoulder. Danny walked close to his mother's side, the way he had been doing since February. He had not said much about his father leaving. He had just started staying closer to Maria, as if he was making up for the space that had been left. Hank held the door open. He did not rush anyone. He stood back and let the family go in first and then followed, removing his hat and placing it on the hook near the door. The woman behind the counter looked up from where she was refilling a coffee pot. Her name tag said Grace. She was somewhere in her 50s and had the kind of face that had smiled a great many times. "Morning, Hank," she said. "Morning, Grace," he said. "Can we get a booth? And 3 hot chocolates, please." He said it without looking at Maria, and without asking. He simply said it, and then he gestured to the booth by the second window, the one with the best light. Maria noticed that he had said 3, not 4 or 5. He had counted the children exactly. That told her something. They settled into the booth. Maria sat on one side with Rosie pressed against her. Marcus and Danny sat across from them. Hank pulled a chair from a nearby table and sat at the end, neither crowding the family into the booth nor placing himself apart from the table. He made himself, somehow, part of the conversation without taking it over. Grace brought 3 mugs of hot chocolate with small marshmallows. She set them down in front of the children without fanfare and left 2 coffees, one for Maria, one for Hank, and went back to the counter without saying another word. She was the kind of woman who could read a room. Rosie wrapped both hands around her mug and said nothing. She just looked into the chocolate the way children look into things they find wonderful. Danny watched Hank the way 11-year-old boys watch strangers, with suspicion that he was trying to make look like calm. Marcus said nothing and looked at his mother. Maria looked at Hank. "You said you wanted to talk to me about something," she said. She kept her voice even. She had not touched her coffee. Hank nodded. He put his own hands around his mug but did not drink from it. "I do," he said. "But first I'd like to ask you something, if that's all right." "Go ahead," Maria said. "How long has it been like this?" he said. He did not gesture or wave his hand to indicate what he meant. He just said it, directly and simply, and trusted her to understand. She understood. She looked at him for a moment. She was used to people asking questions that were not really questions. Social workers who had clipboards. Neighbors who had concerned faces and then changed the subject. People who said, "Are you doing okay?" in the tone that meant they did not actually want a full answer. Hank did not seem to be asking that kind of question. His eyes were on hers and they did not move away. 4 months, she said, properly bad. 6 months before that, getting worse. He nodded once. 3 kids, he said. Just you? Just me, she said. You working? Part-time, she said. Office cleaning. 2 evenings a week. It's not enough. Any family nearby? No, she said. My mother passed 4 years ago. My father has been gone a long time. I have a cousin in New Mexico. We're not close. Hank listened to all of this without showing anything on his face except attention. He was not performing sympathy. He was just listening the way a person listens when they mean to do something with what they hear. Rosie reached across the table and touched one of the marshmallows in her mug. She pressed it down into the chocolate and watched it rise back up. She did this several times. Where did you grow up? Hank asked Maria. The question surprised her. She had been expecting something practical. Numbers, situations, logistics. I'm sorry? Where did you grow up? He said again. A small town, she said, in the hill country, about 60 miles east of here. Farm or town? Farm, she said. My grandfather had cattle, some chickens, a vegetable garden. Something moved in Hank's expression. Not much. A small shift, so you know something about that kind of life, he said. I was a child, Maria said. I know the basics. I know how to work hard. Hank picked up his coffee cup then, finally, and took one slow sip. He set it down and looked at her. I'm going to tell you something, he said, and I want you to hear the whole thing before you say no, because I think your first instinct is going to be to say no, and I'd like you to wait until I've finished. Maria sat back slightly. Marcus was very still across the table. He was listening to every word. My name is Henry Calloway, Hank said. Most people call me Hank. I run a cattle ranch about 8 miles north of town, about 1,400 acres. I've been running it since I was in my 30s, and before that my father ran it, and before that his father. I am not a rich man by the world's standard, but I have a working ranch, and I have land that pays for itself when I manage it properly. He paused. He seemed to be choosing his next words with care. I have a cottage on the east side of the property, he continued. It's been empty for just over a year. It's a small place, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a bathroom, a front porch. It's well built, it's solid. There's a wood stove that keeps it warm and a garden space out back. It has been sitting there without anyone in it, because I haven't needed anyone in it, and because I haven't felt like dealing with it. He stopped again. He picked up his coffee cup, looked at it, put it down without drinking. My wife managed a great deal of what keeps a ranch running, he said. The correspondence, the books, the coordination with the feed suppliers, the coordination with the seasonal workers. She also cooked for anyone who needed it, organized the charitable work we did in this county for about 20 years, and kept the property looking like a place worth being proud of. She died 18 months ago, and I have not replaced what she did, and the ranch is showing it. The booth was quiet. Even Danny had stopped watching Hank with suspicion. He was just listening now. I am not offering you charity, Hank said. He looked at Maria directly and said it with clarity. I am offering you a job, a proper one, with a contract and a fair wage. You would manage the cottage, help with the administrative work on the ranch, keep a correspondence log, help coordinate with suppliers, and do whatever is reasonable for a property manager to do. In return, you and your children would live in the cottage without rent. The wage would be paid weekly, in cash or by transfer, your choice. You would have 1 day off during the week and weekends free. The work would start each morning at 7 and end at 3 in the afternoon, so your children are home from school before you finish. He had clearly thought about this. The details were too specific, too considered, for it to be something he had just put together in the last 5 minutes. Maria stared at him. I noticed your son, Hank said. He glanced at Marcus. He looks like a young man who's used to looking after things. Marcus did not speak, but his posture changed slightly. He straightened without seeming to know he was doing it. I'm not asking your son to work, Hank said quickly. He's 14 and his job is school. I'm just saying I noticed. Maria said nothing. She was looking at the man across from her with a very complicated expression. She was trying to find what was wrong with what he was saying. She was looking for the piece that did not fit, the thing that would make the whole offer make a different kind of sense. She did not find it. Why, she said. Why me? You don't know me. You heard 30 seconds of a conversation in a pawn shop. Hank was quiet for a moment. Your little girl waved at me, he said. Maria blinked. Through the window, Hank said. When I was inside, I looked out at your children on the bench, and your daughter looked at me and she waved. She didn't look afraid. She didn't look unhappy. She looked determined, like she was just getting through the morning and she would be all right. He looked at his coffee cup. My wife would have waved back, he said. She would have gone out there and introduced herself and brought them all inside within about 4 minutes. She was that kind of person. He paused. I am not that kind of person, but I try to make the decisions she would have respected. Across the booth, Rosie had finished her hot chocolate and was looking at Hank very seriously. She had been listening to everything. 6-year-old children always listen to everything. Is your ranch big? Rosie asked. Danny looked at her sharply. Rosie. It's all right, Hank said. He looked at Rosie. It's pretty big, he said. There are about 300 cattle, some horses, a lot of chickens. Rosie's eyes widened slightly. How many chickens? More than I can count, Hank said. But not because there are too many. I just don't count them very often. Rosie nodded, as though this was a reasonable answer. Maria watched this exchange. She looked at her daughter, and then back at the man across the table. She thought about the ring in her pocket. She thought about $40. She thought about what $40 would look like in 2 weeks, gone, and then what? She also thought about something she had not allowed herself to think about in a very long time. She thought about what it would feel like to not be afraid every morning. The cottage, she said. 2 bedrooms. There are 4 of us. The boys can share, Marcus said quietly. He was looking at Maria. Rosie could have the other room with you. We've been sharing the sofa. A real room is fine. Maria looked at her son. 14 years old and already calculating how to make things work. She felt something pull tight in her chest. I'd want to see the contract, Maria said. She turned back to Hank. In writing, before I agree to anything. Of course, Hank said. I'd want to see the cottage before I agree to anything. Of course, he said again. And I'd want to keep my part-time job until I know this is real and stable, she said. Hank considered this. That's your right, he said. It would make for long days at first. But that's your decision. I make my own decisions, Maria said. I see that, Hank said. He did not smile. He just said it as a statement of fact, and the way he said it made it sound like a compliment. Maria looked at her children. Marcus was watching her face. Danny was picking at the edge of his sleeve. Rosie had turned around in the seat and was now looking out the window at the street, at the gray winter morning, at the people walking past in their coats. Maria thought about the apartment. She thought about the water stain on the ceiling. She thought about the smell of the place and the cold floor and the fold-out sofa where her boys had been sleeping for months without complaining. She thought about her mother's ring in her pocket. She thought about how she had walked into that pawn shop with it, ready to let it go, because there was simply no other choice. And now she was sitting in a warm diner with a man she had never met, who was offering her something that sounded, if she was honest, like the kind of thing that didn't happen to people like her. But here it was, sitting right in front of her. She reached for her coffee cup. She drank from it slowly. It was good coffee, strong and hot, the kind that told you someone cared about how it was made. What's the name of the ranch? She asked. Callaway Creek, Hank said. Maria set her cup down. She straightened her spine. She looked at Henry Callaway with her clearest eyes. I'll see the cottage, she said. Today, if that's possible. I'll look at the contract, and then I will make my decision. That's fair, Hank said. He reached into his jacket pocket and placed his watch on the table. He looked at it. I can take you out there this morning, he said, if you're ready. Maria looked at her children again, at Rosie, who had turned back from the window and was now watching her mother with those dark, quiet eyes. At Danny, who had finally relaxed enough to put both elbows on the table. At Marcus, who was already sitting like someone who has made up his mind even though it wasn't his decision to make. She reached into her pocket and felt the ring. Still there. Still hers. Yes, she said. We're ready. 8 miles north of town, the highway gave way to a county road, and the county road gave way to a gravel track that ran straight between 2 stretches of flat open pasture before bending slightly left and opening up into something that made Maria stop breathing for a moment. She had been following Hank's truck in her old car, a gray sedan with 200,000 miles on it and a heating system that worked on only one side. She had the children with her, and they had been quiet for most of the drive, all 3 of them watching the landscape change through the windows. Danny had pressed his forehead to the glass. Rosie had fallen asleep with her head against Marcus's arm. But when the property came into view, Danny sat up and said quietly, "Wow." Maria said nothing. She just drove, and she looked. The ranch stretched out across rolling land that moved in long, slow waves, like something frozen in mid-breath. The grass was winter yellow, and the sky above it was a pale, cold blue, and the whole thing looked like a painting done by someone who understood that the most honest landscapes were the plain ones. In the distance, she could make out cattle, dark spots moving slowly across the far pasture. Closer to the main house, there were horses in a paddock. She counted 4 from the road. The main house itself was a large farmhouse, white painted wood, a wide front porch, a tin roof, a chimney with smoke rising from it. It had the look of a house that had been repaired and repainted many times, not out of vanity but out of a steady, quiet commitment to upkeep. It was the look of a house that someone loved. Hank drove past the main house without stopping, and took a narrower track that curved around the east side of a large oak tree, and went down a slight slope. Maria followed. The track ended at a small building set back from a fence line, surrounded by a garden space that was bare in the winter but clearly had structure. Raised beds, a pathway, a small tool shed at the side. The cottage. It was small, as Hank had said, but it was not small in the way that made you feel cramped. It was small in the way that made you feel held. The walls were the same white-painted wood as the main house. The front porch was narrow but had 2 chairs on it, and a welcome mat that was frayed but clean. The windows were large, and the glass was clear. Someone had put shutters on the outside of each window, dark green, and 2 of them were slightly open, as if the house had been airing itself out. Maria parked and got out. The air here was cold and clean, and she could smell something she had not smelled in years: land. The particular smell of dry grass and earth and animals at a distance. It moved something in her that she had not expected. Hank was already out of his truck and waiting near the front path. He had the keys in his hand. "You want to go inside?" he said. Maria nodded. She reached back into the car and gently woke Rosie, lifting her out and settling her on her hip. Danny and Marcus climbed out and stood on the path, looking at the cottage. "Is this it?" Danny said. "This is it," Hank said. "Come on." He opened the front door and stood aside. Maria walked in first. She stood in the entrance and looked around slowly. The main room was a combined sitting and dining area, with a wood stove set into the far wall and a small stack of logs beside it. The floor was wooden, wide planks, scuffed in places but solid. There were 2 windows looking out toward the fence line and the pasture beyond. The light that came in was clean and even. The kitchen was through a doorway to the right. It was small but functional. A gas stove, a sink with a window above it looking out at the garden, a refrigerator that was old but running. Maria ran her hand along the counter. The surface was worn but scrubbed clean. "When did someone last live here?" she asked. "A year ago," Hank said. "I had a ranch hand and his wife here for 2 years. They moved back east when her mother got sick. I cleaned the place out in the spring but haven't done much with it since." "Who cleaned it in spring?" Maria asked. "I did," Hank said. "And my daughter helped." Maria nodded. She went to the bedrooms. The first one was larger, a double room with a window that faced east, toward the morning. The second was smaller, barely big enough for 2 single beds, but it had a built-in closet and a shelf along one wall. Marcus stood in the doorway of the smaller room and looked at it. "Danny and I could put the beds along either side," he said. He was already calculating. "We'd need to get beds," Danny said. "I have 2 single frames in storage," Hank said from the hallway. "They belonged to my grandchildren when they visited. I'll get them brought over." Maria stood in the larger bedroom and looked out the window. The sun was still low in the winter sky, coming in at an angle, and it put a long stripe of gold across the wooden floor. Rosie, on her hip, reached out toward it. "It's warm," Rosie said, meaning the light. "It is," Maria said. She stood there for a moment longer than she needed to. She was doing something she rarely let herself do. She was imagining. She was picturing what this room would look like with her things in it. The small lamp from the nightstand, the photograph of her mother that sat on the dresser, the cardigan hung on the back of the door. She stopped herself. She was not going to imagine anything yet, not until she had read the contract. She turned and walked back to the main room. Hank was standing near the wood stove. He had not tried to sell her anything while she looked around. He had not said a word. He had simply waited. "What's the wage?" she said. $900 a month, Hank said. "Paid weekly in $225 installments. Or monthly if you prefer. And the work is 7 to 3? Monday through Friday," he said. 7 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon. Not earlier, not later unless there is a genuine emergency that I would discuss with you in advance." "What counts as emergency?" "A supplier crisis," Hank said. "A storm damage situation. Something that requires immediate decisions I can't make alone. Those situations are rare. When they happen, I would give you advance notice when possible, and extra pay when not." Maria looked at him. She was not used to this kind of clarity. Most agreements she had encountered in her life, jobs, arrangements, situations, had the specific and deliberate quality of being slightly unclear. Unclear conditions suited people who wanted to take advantage of them later. Clear ones suggested someone who intended to keep their word. "I want a lawyer to look at the contract before I sign it," she said. I'd expect nothing less, Hank said. I had it drawn up by a legal firm in town. You can take a copy to whoever you like. Maria looked at her sons. Danny was sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, which was the thing he always did in new spaces. He would find a wall and sit against it while he decided how he felt about a place. Marcus was standing at the window, looking out at the pasture. Marcus, she said. He turned. What do you think? She said. He looked at her for a moment, then looked around the room. He looked at the wood stove, and the wooden floors, and the light coming in. He looked at his little sister still on his mother's hip, watching the stripe of sun on the floor. I think it's real, he said. That was all he said. But Maria understood exactly what he meant. He meant, I think this is actually happening, and I think we should not let it go. I'll have questions, she told Hank. Ask them, he said. Not all of them right now. I need to think. I need to read the contract. I need to talk to my children. Take all the time you need, he said. How much time do I have? The cottage isn't going anywhere, Hank said. But I'll be honest with you. I'd like an answer within the week. Not because I'm in a hurry, but because I've been putting off this decision for a year. And now that I've made it, I'd like to move forward. Maria nodded. She set Rosie down on the floor. Rosie immediately walked to the wood stove and stood in front of it, holding her hands out to feel its warmth even though it wasn't lit. She did this as if it were perfectly natural to approach a cold stove and expect heat from it. We'll come back tomorrow, Maria said, with a list of questions. Hank reached into the breast pocket of his flannel shirt and pulled out a folded envelope. He held it out to her. The contract is in there, he said. My number is on the outside. You can call any time before 9 in the evening. Maria took the envelope. She held it in both hands for a moment. Mr. Calloway, she said. Hank, he said. Hank, she said. She paused. What made you come into the pawn shop this morning? He looked faintly surprised by the question. He thought about it. I had a watch being repaired, he said. I got a message 3 days ago that it was done. I'd been putting off picking it up. Why today? He thought again. I don't know, he said. I just went. Maria looked at him for another moment. Then she put the envelope in her coat pocket, beside the ring. Outside, walking back to the car, Danny reached up and took her hand, something he rarely did anymore. He was 11 and had recently decided that hand-holding was too young for him, but he took her hand now and held it as they walked down the path. She did not point this out. She just held his hand. Marcus walked ahead and opened the car doors for everyone. Rosie stopped on the path and looked back at the cottage. Mama, she said, I like the chickens. There are no chickens here, Danny said. Those are at the main house. I know, Rosie said. She looked at the cottage one more time. But they could come. Marcus looked at Maria over the roof of the car. He was trying not to smile and not quite managing it. Maria looked at her oldest son's almost smile and felt something she had not felt in months. She felt, for the first time in a very long time, that the next thing might be better than the last. She did not say this out loud. She folded it carefully and put it somewhere safe, the way she had put the ring. Then she buckled Rosie in, started the car, and drove back down the gravel track toward the county road, with Calloway Creek falling away behind her in the rearview mirror, and 8 miles of cold, clear morning ahead. That evening, Maria sat at the kitchen table of her apartment with the envelope open in front of her. The children were in bed. Danny had fallen asleep quickly, the way he always did when something good had happened, as if the body finally feels safe enough to rest. Rosie had asked 3 questions about chickens and then gone quiet mid-sentence, asleep before Maria had finished answering the 3rd one. Marcus had stayed up. He was sitting across the table from his mother, reading the contract. He was a careful reader, even at 14. He moved his finger along each line and stopped when something confused him and went back and read it again. Maria watched him doing this and felt the particular ache of a parent watching a child grow up faster than they should have to. The termination clause, Marcus said. He looked up. It says either party can end the arrangement with 30 days' notice in writing. Yes, Maria said. I noticed that. That's fair, he said. That means we can leave if we need to. It also means he can ask us to leave, Maria said. Marcus nodded. But 30 days. That's enough time to figure out something else. And by then you'd have a month's wages. Maria looked at him. When did you start thinking this way? She said. He shrugged, the way teenagers shrug when they don't want to say something too direct. Since February, he said. She looked down at the contract. Since February. Since the night his father left and something inside her 14-year-old son quietly shifted from boy to something older and more careful. She picked up the contract and read the wage clause again. $900 a month. $225 a week. It was not a great deal of money. But it was real money. It was money plus no rent, plus no electric bill, plus no landlord's red notices, plus living on land that had air and space and a garden that could grow food if she knew what she was doing. And she did know what she was doing, at least partly, from years spent watching her grandfather tend his. She put the contract down and looked at the ceiling. The water stain was up there. It had grown again. She was almost sure of it. Or maybe she was just more aware of it now, because she was allowing herself, cautiously, to compare it to something. "Marcus," she said, "tell me what worries you." He thought about it. He was good at thinking before he spoke, which was a quality Maria had always valued in people, and had tried, with mixed success, to teach her children. "I worry he'll change his mind," Marcus said. "That once we're there and settled, something will happen and we'll have to leave, and it'll be worse than starting over from the apartment." "That's a reasonable thing to worry about," Maria said. "And I worry about the contract not covering things it should cover," he said. "Like what if something in the cottage breaks? Who pays for that?" Maria looked at the contract. "Clause 14, she said. "Property maintenance costs up to $50 come from a monthly household account he provides. Above $50 is his responsibility, unless damage is caused by us." Marcus nodded slowly. "That's good," he said. "What else?" Maria said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something she had not expected. "I worry that we'll like it," he said. "That we'll get there and the kids will be happy. And then something will happen, and it'll be taken away, and it'll hurt more because we liked it." Maria looked at her son for a long time. "That's not a reason not to go," she said finally. "I know," he said. "Being afraid of liking something is not a reason to stay in the cold." "I know," he said again. She reached across the table and put her hand over his for a moment. He let her. He was 14, and sometimes embarrassed by affection, but right now he just sat still and let her. "I'm going to call the legal aid office tomorrow morning," she said. "I want someone to read this before I sign. Can you watch Rosie and Danny after school tomorrow until I get back?" "Yes," he said. "And I want you to think about what questions to ask when we go back to the ranch." I told him we'd come with a list. Marcus reached into his backpack, which was hanging on the back of his chair. He pulled out a folded piece of lined paper. He had already written a list. Maria looked at it. There were 11 questions on it, written in his clear, careful handwriting. She read through them. They were good questions, practical, specific, fair. They covered things like school bus access from the ranch road, whether the cottage's well water was tested, who handled the ranch's accounts, and where Maria's role would overlap with that, whether there were any restrictions on the children using the land. "This is good," she said. He folded the paper and set it back on the table between them. "Mom," he said. He used the word deliberately, carefully, the way he sometimes did when he wanted her to understand that he was being serious and not just talking. "I think we should go." She looked at him. "I think it's real," he said. He was repeating what he had said at the cottage, but saying it differently now. I looked at him the whole time we were there. He never looked away when he talked. He didn't try to rush you. He had the contract already written. Those are things that a person does when they mean what they say. "You watched all of that?" "I watch everything," Marcus said. It was said matter-of-factly, without pride. It was just true. Maria sat back in her chair. "The legal aid office opens at 8, she said. "I'll be up," Marcus said. She shook her head slightly. "You're going to school," she said. "I'll handle the legal aid office." He looked like he wanted to argue. He did not argue. They sat together at the table for a few more minutes. The apartment was quiet except for the sound of the wind outside, which had picked up after dark and was pressing against the window glass with a low, steady sound. Maria had always found wind at night unsettling. It made the thin walls of the apartment feel thinner. She picked up the contract and read it again from the beginning. The next morning she called the legal aid office at 8 o'clock exactly. A woman named Paula answered, and Maria explained the situation quickly and clearly. Paula said she had an opening at 10. Maria took it. She drove to the legal aid office, which was in a building that shared space with a tax preparation service and a notary, and sat across from a young lawyer named George Ferris who had kind eyes and a careful manner. She put the contract on his desk and he read it while she watched. He made 3 small notes. When he finished, he looked up. "It's solid," he said. "Whoever drafted this did a good job. The wage clause is clear. The housing terms are specific. The termination clause is fair to both parties." He tapped one of his notes. "There's one thing I'd add. You should request a clause specifying that the housing arrangement is tied to the employment, but that in the event of the employer's death or incapacitation, The family is entitled to 30 days housing continuation with salary. Maria had not thought of that. Also, he said, tapping another note, I'd specify who covers your travel costs if the job requires you to go off property for ranch business. I'll ask about that, Maria said. He tapped the third note. And this phrase here, duties as reasonably required, is a bit broad. I'd suggest listing specific duties and having everything else described as other duties by mutual agreement. That way you can't be asked to do something completely outside the scope without your consent. Can I write those changes in? Maria said. You can propose them, George said. If he agrees, you both initial the changes and sign. If he doesn't agree, you'll want to think carefully about whether that's a concern. Maria folded the contract carefully back into the envelope. Thank you, she said. George leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Delgado, he said, is there anything about this situation, about Mr. Calloway, that makes you feel unsafe? She thought about this seriously. She did not brush past it. No, she said. He is a quiet person. He was direct with me. He did not make me feel like I owed him anything. She paused. He ordered hot chocolates for my children without asking. He didn't say a single thing in the pawn shop until he had listened to the whole situation, and when he spoke, he didn't make me feel like he was rescuing me. George nodded slowly. He made me feel like he was offering me a job, Maria said. She drove back to the apartment, called the number on the outside of the envelope, and Hank picked up on the second ring. I've had the contract reviewed, she said. There are 3 changes I'd like to propose. Tell me, he said. She told him. There was a pause after each one. The first 2 are reasonable, he said. Done. For the third, the broad duties clause, I'd suggest we list 5 specific duties and add the mutual agreement language you described. Does that work? Yes, she said. I'll have the revised contract ready tomorrow morning, he said. You can come by the ranch and we can go over it together. Yes, she said again. There was a brief pause on the line. Mrs. Delgado, Hank said. I want to say something. You don't have to respond to it. I just want to say it. Go ahead, she said. I've run this ranch for 25 years, he said. I've had a lot of people work here, and a lot of people pass through, and I've made a lot of decisions about people. I don't make this kind of offer lightly. He paused. The fact that you had the contract reviewed before you agreed to anything tells me I made the right call. Maria held the phone for a moment after he said this. Then she said, 7 tomorrow morning. 7 tomorrow morning, he said. Come to the main house. I'll have coffee on. She hung up. She stood in the kitchen of her apartment with the phone in her hand and the water stain on the ceiling above her and the cold seeping through the window gaps, and she allowed herself one breath, deep, slow, full, before she went to start the children's dinner. The ring was still in her pocket. She had not put it back in the drawer. She was carrying it with her, the way you carry something when you're not ready to put it down but you're also not ready to let it go. They moved on a Saturday. Maria had given the landlord his 30 days notice the morning after she signed the contract, a revised contract, clean and clear, that now included all 3 changes and was initialed on every page by both parties. She had also kept her part-time cleaning job for the first month, as she had said she would, though Hank had not pushed her to give it up. Moving had not taken long. When you have sold most of what you own, packing goes quickly. They had 4 boxes of clothes, 2 boxes of kitchen things, 1 box of books, 1 box of school supplies and papers, 2 bags of bedding, and a collection of small items that did not fit into any category. A drawing Danny had made in 2nd grade, a ceramic mug with a chipped handle that Maria had kept because she liked the weight of it, a small framed photograph of Irene Delgado in her garden, taken the summer before she got sick. Marcus carried more boxes than anyone. He did not make a point of it. He just did it. They loaded the car in 2 trips. On the 2nd trip, as they were coming down the stairs with the last of the boxes, the neighbor from across the hall, not Connie, who was still away, but an older man named Ed who had lived there for 11 years and who mostly kept to himself, came out of his apartment and watched them. You moving? He said. Yes, Maria said. He looked at the boxes. He looked at the children. He looked at Maria. You going somewhere better? He said. I think so, Maria said. He nodded once, slowly, as if this was the answer he had been hoping to hear. Good, he said. Then he went back inside. On the drive out to the ranch, Rosie fell asleep in the back seat with her face pressed against the window, the same position she had been in on the first drive out, as if she remembered the road and was comfortable on it already. Danny sat in the middle with his hands folded in his lap, watching the landscape move past. He had stopped pressing his forehead to the glass. He was just watching. Marcus sat in the passenger seat beside Maria, which was new. He had always sat in the back before. But today, without being asked and without asking, he had climbed into the front. Maria said nothing about it. She just adjusted the mirror slightly. The January sky above the county road was pale blue and wide, the kind of sky that made the land below it look very small and very still. The grass in the pastures on either side of the road was winter brown, and the trees along the fence lines were bare, and the whole world had a stripped-down, honest look to it. No decoration, just land and sky and cold. But it was beautiful. Maria noticed this in a way she had not on the first drive out. The first time she had been measuring everything, calculating, preparing herself for disappointment. This time she allowed herself to look. Callaway Creek came into view around the same curve as before, but this time it looked different, because this time she was driving toward it instead of toward it to test it. She was coming home. That was the word that occurred to her, and she was surprised by it and did not push it away. When they turned down the track to the cottage, Hank's truck was parked outside. He was on the front porch with a hammer, attaching something to the railing. He looked up when the car came down the track and nodded once. He had fixed the step. Maria noticed it immediately. There had been a slight give in the third step of the porch on their first visit. Not dangerous, but unsteady, the kind of small thing a person notices and files away. He had replaced the board. It was fresh wood, still pale, not yet weathered. He had also, and this was the thing that made Maria stand still for a moment when she got out of the car, chopped and stacked a new pile of firewood by the door. The stack was neat and precise and smelled of fresh-cut oak. It was enough wood for several weeks. "Morning," Hank said. "Morning," Maria said. He climbed down from the porch and put the hammer in his belt loop. He looked at the children. "You need help with the boxes?" "We've got it," Marcus said. Hank looked at Marcus for a moment. He did not try to argue. He stepped back. They carried the boxes in. The cottage was warm. Hank had lit the wood stove before they arrived, and the air inside was dry and even, and smelled of wood smoke and the faint, particular smell of a freshly cleaned house. He had swept the floors. He had wiped the counters. In the 2 bedrooms, the furniture had been arranged. The 2 single frames he had mentioned were now in the smaller room, made up with plain white sheets and dark blankets. The larger room had the original double frame, also made up. Maria stood in the doorway of the smaller room. She looked at the beds. They were not new beds. She could see the marks of use on the frames, the slight variation of color where they had been polished over the years. But they were good, solid beds. They were the beds of a family that had slept in them and left them behind in good condition. "Those were my children's when they were young," Hank said from the hallway behind her. "My daughter Claire's and my son Owen's. They're both grown and gone. The beds have been in storage for 20 years. He said this without sentimentality, just as information. "Thank you," Maria said. "There's food in the kitchen," he said. "Basic things. Bread, eggs, milk, some tin goods. Just enough for the first few days. It's from my kitchen, not a gift." He caught himself when he said it and seemed faintly embarrassed. "What I mean is, you don't owe me for it. I'm just saying it's there." Maria turned to look at him. He was standing in the narrow hallway, too big for it really, filling up the space without trying to. His discomfort with the idea of seeming generous was plain. It was the discomfort of a private man who had done a kind thing, and now didn't know what to do with the attention it brought him. "Hank," she said. "Yes. I'm going to cook dinner tonight," she said. "A proper one, and if you'd like to come eat with us, you're welcome. You don't have to, but the invitation is there." He looked at her for a moment. "I'll think about it," he said. He did not come for dinner that night, but the next morning, when Maria opened the front door at 6:45 to walk the 100 yards to the main house for her first day of work, she found a jar of preserved peaches on the porch step with a handwritten note that said, "From Eleanor's pantry." Not a gift, just something that shouldn't go to waste. She stood on the cold porch in the gray morning light and held the jar and read the note twice. Then she put it inside, woke the children, made sure they had breakfast, walked Marcus and Danny to the end of the ranch road where the school bus would pick them up, came back for Rosie, who she would bring with her to the main house for the morning until the local childcare arrangement Hank had mentioned was confirmed, and walked up the track toward the main house as the sun came over the hills to the east and turned everything briefly gold. The main house was larger inside than it had looked from the road. The kitchen was big, with a long wooden table at the center and copper pots hanging from a rack above the stove. There was a desk in the corner, which Hank had cleared and set with a lamp, a notebook, and a printed copy of the supplier contacts Maria would need to manage. He was already at the stove when she came in. He did not turn around. "Coffee's made," he said. Rosie can sit at the table. There are crayons in the second drawer. Rosie, who had been holding Maria's hand, immediately released it and went to the table to investigate the drawer. Maria poured herself coffee and stood in the kitchen and looked around. There was a bulletin board above the desk, covered in notes and receipts and reminders in a woman's handwriting. Eleanor's handwriting, Maria understood. Hank had not removed it. She did not comment on it. She sat at the desk, opened the notebook, and asked Hank to walk her through the current situation with the suppliers, the outstanding accounts, and whatever had not been dealt with properly in the last 18 months. He sat across from her and talked for an hour. He was thorough. He knew his ranch better than anyone knew anything she had ever seen. The names of every supplier and every contact, the seasonal rhythm of every purchase, the reason behind every decision. What he did not know was how to write it all down and keep track of it, which was exactly what Eleanor had done, and exactly what Maria had been asked to do. She took notes in the notebook. She asked questions. She asked him to slow down twice and back up once. She organized what he was telling her into a system as he talked, drawing columns and categories in a way that made sense of it. By 9 in the morning, she had a clear picture of the ranch's administrative situation. By 10, she had sorted the outstanding supplier correspondence into 3 categories: urgent, pending, and done. By 11, she had drafted 3 response letters, using the template style she found in a binder on the shelf above the desk. Eleanor's templates, clean and professional and direct. Hank came back through the kitchen at 11 and found her at the desk, writing the 3rd letter. He looked over her shoulder, briefly, at what she had done. He said nothing. He went to the stove and poured himself a coffee. He came back and leaned against the counter with his cup, looking at the desk. "You organized that fast," he said. "It wasn't complicated," she said. "It just needed to be looked at clearly." He looked at the bulletin board above the desk, at Eleanor's notes. "I should probably take those down," he said, more to himself than to her. "Not on my account," Maria said. She was writing and did not look up. "They're useful. She had a good system." There was a silence. "She did," Hank said. He said it quietly, and then he took his coffee and went out through the back door to the pasture. Maria kept writing. Rosie, at the table, was drawing a picture of what appeared to be a very large chicken standing in a field with smaller chickens around it. She was adding details to each one with great seriousness. The morning light moved across the kitchen floor. Outside, somewhere not too far away, one of the horses made a sound that carried in the cold air. The wood stove in the corner of the kitchen ticked and breathed. Maria put the pen down for a moment and looked out the window at the land. She had not been afraid this morning. She had been busy and focused and attentive, but not afraid. For the first time in 6 months, she had woken up knowing what the day would hold. She picked up the pen again. Claire Calloway arrived on a Thursday. She drove a white pickup truck that she parked directly in front of the main house without slowing down properly, the way someone drives when they are in a hurry and also in a mood. She was 30 years old, with her father's height and her mother's dark eyes, and a jaw that was set very firmly as she came through the kitchen door. Maria was at the desk in the corner. Rosie was at the table with a picture book. Hank was outside with the horses and had been since after breakfast. Claire stopped when she saw Maria. She looked at her. She looked at Rosie. She looked at the desk, which had been reorganized in the week Maria had been there. The bulletin board now had Maria's supply contact list pinned beside Eleanor's notes, and the desk surface had a clean, ordered system of folders and labeled trays. Then she looked at the jar of preserved peaches that Maria had moved to the kitchen shelf, because she had not wanted to use them all, and had mentioned to Hank that she was keeping them for something special. "Who are you?" Claire said. She was not rude about it. She was direct. It was the voice of a person who wanted an answer and intended to have it. "Maria Delgado," Maria said. She stood up from the desk. "Your father hired me as property manager. We have a contract." "I know what the contract says," Claire said. "I read it. He sent it to me last week." "Then you know who I am," Maria said. Claire looked at her. It was a frank look, the kind that moved over a person and took stock without pretending not to. "You were the woman in the pawn shop," Claire said. "Yes," Maria said. Claire put her keys down on the counter. She went to the coffee pot and poured herself a cup and stood at the counter with it, which was the same thing her father did when he was thinking. Maria noticed this and said nothing. Rosie looked up from her book, looked at Claire with the patient attention she gave to everyone new, and went back to her reading. "My father has been alone for 18 months, Claire said. "He is not a complicated person. He is direct, and he works hard, and he doesn't ask for help easily. When he makes a decision like this, it usually means something." She paused. But he is also 60 years old, and sometimes lonely people make decisions they wouldn't make if they weren't lonely. That's a reasonable thing to wonder about, Maria said. Claire looked at her. I'm not wondering about it. I'm telling you that I wondered about it. And now? Maria said. Claire looked at the desk again, at the folders and the labeled trays and the organized correspondence. She looked at the supply contact list on the bulletin board, something that had not existed 2 weeks ago and that Hank had mentioned on the phone was already saving him time. She looked at Eleanor's notes, which were still there, not removed or covered over but incorporated into the new system as if they belonged there. Because they did. She looked at Rosie, who was small and quiet, and reading a book about a fox who lived in a house and solved small problems for his neighbors. And now I'm still watching, Claire said. She was honest about it. I hope that doesn't offend you. It doesn't, Maria said. If I had a parent who made a sudden decision like this one, I'd be watching too. Claire set her cup down. He mentioned your children, she said. Marcus and Danny and Rosie. Yes. Marcus is 14? Yes. He started helping with the horses, Claire said. This was not a question. After school, yes, Maria said. He asked Hank. Hank said yes. He's not paid. He doesn't need to be out there, but he asked to be, and Hank was willing. Claire was quiet for a moment. My father never lets anyone near the horses unless he trusts them, she said. I know, Maria said. Claire looked at her for another moment. Then, with a slight and not entirely comfortable shift in her manner, she pulled a chair from the table and sat down near the desk. Tell me what the situation was when you started, she said. The administrative situation, Maria told her. She was clear and specific, and did not smooth over the parts that showed the ranch had been poorly managed in some ways for the past year and a half. She explained the supplier accounts that had fallen behind, the filing system that had stopped being maintained, the correspondence that had sat unread and unanswered. She explained what she had done to address each of these things and what still needed to be done. Claire listened. She was sharp. She asked 3 questions, all of them good ones, and Maria answered each one directly. When Maria finished, Claire was quiet for a moment. He told me you had the contract reviewed by a lawyer before you signed it, she said. I did, Maria said. And you negotiated 3 changes to it. I did. And you kept your other job for the first month. I did, Maria said. I gave it up last week, once I was confident this situation was real. Claire leaned back in the chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. It was the look of a person running a calculation that is coming out differently than expected. My mother's name was Eleanor, she said. I know, Maria said. Did my father tell you about her? A little, Maria said. Enough. Claire looked at her. Do you know what she would have thought about this? She said. No, Maria said. I didn't know her. She would have done exactly what he did, Claire said. She would have walked into that pawn shop, heard what was happening, and ended up adopting your entire family by lunchtime. There was something in her voice that was not quite a smile and not quite grief. My father is more reserved, but he is Eleanor's husband. He always has been, even now. Maria looked at the jar of preserved peaches on the shelf. The peaches on the shelf, she said. He left them on the porch for me on my first morning. Claire looked at the jar. She looked at it for a long time. She made those last summer, Claire said. The summer before she died. She was already sick by then, but she insisted on the peaches. She said you don't skip peach preserving season just because you're not well. She stopped. She made about 30 jars. He hasn't been able to eat them. The kitchen was very quiet. Rosie had closed her book and was now looking at the peach jar too, the way children look at things when they sense they've become important. Claire, Maria said. Claire looked at her. I understand why you came here, Maria said, and I understand why you're still watching. And I want to say, not to reassure you, but because it's true, that I am here to work. This is a job. It is a good job, and I am grateful for it. And I intend to do it properly and honestly. Your father is my employer. I respect that arrangement. I am not trying to take anything that is yours. Claire looked at her for a moment. Then she said, Can I see the cottage? Of course, Maria said. They walked down the track together, Rosie between them, her hand in Maria's. The January afternoon was cold and clear and the sky had gone a deeper blue toward the east. Their breath showed in the air. At the cottage, Maria opened the door and let Claire go in first. Claire walked through the rooms slowly, the way Maria had walked through them on that first visit. She stood in the main room and looked at the wood stove, which was clean and tidy. She looked at the kitchen, where there were children's drawings now stuck to the refrigerator with 2 small magnets. She looked at the bedrooms, which were neat. In the smaller room, she saw the 2 single beds that had been her bed and her brother's bed when they were young. She stood in the doorway and looked at them. Maria said nothing. After a long moment, Claire said, "The boys sleep here." "Yes," Maria said. "Do they know whose beds those were?" "No," Maria said. "I didn't think it was my place to tell them." Claire turned and looked at her. Her expression had changed. It was not soft, exactly. Claire Calloway did not seem to be a person whose expression went soft easily. But it had shifted. "It gets cold here at night," Claire said. "The wood stove can't always keep up. Do you know how to manage it properly?" "I'm learning," Maria said. "Hank showed me the draft settings." "There's a trick to it," Claire said. She went to the stove and crouched down and began to explain, in practical detail, how to manage the draft at night so the heat lasted through the coldest hours without burning through all the wood. She knew exactly what she was talking about. She had grown up in this cottage. She had been cold in it in winter and warm in it in summer. She knew every trick of it. Maria listened and took notes on the back of the paper in her pocket. When they came back out of the cottage together and started back up the track toward the main house, Rosie found a large stone she liked and picked it up and put it in her coat pocket. "What are you going to do with that?" Claire asked her. "Keep it," Rosie said. "Why?" Rosie considered this. "It's a good stone," she said. Claire looked at the small, serious face looking up at her, and something happened in her expression that she had clearly not been expecting. She pressed her lips together for a moment. "You can put it on the porch shelf," Claire said. "There's a shelf on the east side of the porch. Plenty of room for good stones." Rosie nodded seriously and held the stone tighter. That evening, after the children were in bed, Maria sat on the porch in the cold air and looked at the dark land around her. The sky was big out here, away from the town's lights. Stars were thick and precise. An owl was calling somewhere in the direction of the big oak. She heard boots on the gravel track before she saw anyone. Hank came around the curve of the track and stopped when he saw her on the porch. "Evening," he said. "Evening," she said. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. He did not come up. "Claire was here," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," Maria said. "She stayed most of the afternoon." He was quiet. "She's a good person," Maria said. "She was careful with me, but she was fair." Hank made a sound that might have been agreement. "She showed me how to manage the wood stove draft," Maria said. "Did she?" he said. "You might have told me that yourself," Maria said. He was quiet again. Then, "I kept meaning to." "Hank," Maria said. "Yes. Thank you, for the peaches." He stood at the bottom of the steps with his hat in his hands. He looked out at the dark land. "She would have wanted someone to eat them," he said. "It seems wasteful otherwise." "I know," Maria said. "I'll use them carefully." He put his hat back on. "Good night, Mrs. Delgado," he said. "Good night, Hank," she said. He walked back up the track. The sound of his boots on the gravel faded slowly into the dark. Maria sat on the porch a little while longer, listening to the owl and looking at the stars, before she went inside and let the warm air of the cottage close around her. February came in slow and difficult, the way February always did in that part of Texas. A cold front moved through during the second week and sat over the land for 5 days, driving temperatures down at night to levels that tested every house and every animal and every person who had to be outside. On the ranch, February was not a quiet month. The cold put pressure on the cattle, which put pressure on feed supplies, which meant more calls, more deliveries to coordinate, more decisions that needed to be made quickly and communicated clearly. Maria worked every morning from 7 to 3, and sometimes went back to the main house in the evening to finish something that had to be finished. Hank had noticed this and told her twice to stop working overtime. She had nodded and then continued. "You're going to burn out before March," he told her one morning, standing in the kitchen doorway watching her write. "I won't," she said, without looking up. "I've seen it happen," he said. "Not to me," she said. He made a sound that was not quite agreement and not quite argument, and went out to the pasture. The truth was that the work was doing something for her that went beyond the wage. It was giving her a shape to the day, a purpose to the morning, a reason for the tiredness at night that was entirely different from the tiredness of worry and fear. This tiredness was clean. It was the kind that came from doing something real, from problems that were solved with thought and effort and specific knowledge. She had forgotten what that felt like. She was remembering it now, and she was not willing to slow down. Marcus was the same way. He had discovered the horses. It had started in the second week, when Hank was leading one of the mares, a big roan named Patience, through the paddock, and Marcus had been standing at the fence watching with the particular stillness he had that was different from his brother's. Danny watched things with visible energy, with movement in his hands and feet even when he was standing still. Marcus watched things with a quietness that looked, from a distance, like not watching at all. Hank had come to the fence with patience and stopped. "You want to meet her?" he said. Marcus had climbed through the fence without being asked twice. Hank showed him how to approach a horse, the angle, the pace, the hand position, and Marcus did it almost right the first time. He adjusted once and then it was right. He had come back every afternoon since then. Danny, who had initially been uninterested in the horses, became interested around the third week when Marcus started being able to do things he couldn't. This was a reliable mechanism. Marcus's ability to do something Danny couldn't always made Danny interested in it. He showed up at the paddock one afternoon after school with his hands in his pockets and an expression of calculated indifference. Hank watched this without comment. He handed Danny a brush and pointed at one of the quieter horses, a gray gelding named Steady, and let him figure it out. By the end of February, both boys were at the paddock most afternoons. Hank had never formally invited them. He simply had not turned them away, and he had given them the basic knowledge they needed and trusted them to use it carefully. They did. Rosie's situation had settled into a routine that suited everyone. Hank had arranged for a retired schoolteacher from town named Gloria to come to the ranch on weekday mornings. Gloria was 70, small, with a deliberate voice and a remarkable amount of patience. She had been teaching children informally since she retired, and had immediately recognized in Rosie the kind of mind that needed more, not less, than what standard kindergarten was offering. Within the first week, Rosie had learned to read 2 new books and had taught Gloria how to draw a chicken in a way that was, by any measure, more accurate than Gloria's original attempt. "She's exceptional," Gloria told Maria at the end of the second week. "I know," Maria said. "Not exceptional in the complicated way," Gloria said. "Exceptional in the good way. She pays attention, and she remembers, and she doesn't stop until she understands something. That's rare." Maria looked at her daughter, who was at the table with a map of North America that Gloria had brought, pointing at things and naming them. "She gets it from her grandfather," Maria said. "He was the same way." The hard months came to mean something different than they had before. Hard, now, meant cold mornings and a full workload and children who were tired by evening. It did not mean the other kind of hard, the kind that had no floor to it. But there was one evening in February that tested this. A supplier, a feed company Hank had used for over a decade, sent an urgent message that their delivery for the following week would be reduced by half due to a regional transport issue. This was not a disaster, but it was a serious problem. Hank needed alternative feed sourced quickly, at a price that didn't break the month's accounts, and delivered to the ranch before the shortage hit. Maria found out about it at 7 in the evening, when Hank came to the cottage door. She opened the door and saw his face and knew something was wrong before he spoke. "We have a feed situation," he said. "Come in," she said. "Tell me." They sat at the kitchen table and he explained it. The children were in the other rooms, Rosie asleep, Marcus reading, Danny somewhere in between. The wood stove was going. The kitchen smelled of the soup Maria had made for dinner. She listened to the whole situation. Then she went to the main house with him and sat at the desk and spent 2 hours on the phone and on the computer working through the supplier network she had spent the past month learning. She found 2 alternative suppliers within 60 miles. She negotiated a delivery schedule with the second one that covered the gap, at a price 4% above normal but within what Hank could manage. By 9:30 she had the confirmations in writing and the deliveries scheduled. Hank sat in the kitchen and watched her work. He said almost nothing during the 2 hours. He answered when she needed information from him, and then went quiet again. When it was done, she put down the pen and looked at him. "It's handled," she said. "The details are in the folder." He looked at the folder. He looked at her. "In 2 hours," he said. "It wasn't complicated," she said. "It just needed someone to deal with it." He was quiet for a moment. "Eleanor would have done this in 90 minutes, he said. There was nothing unkind in it. He was not comparing. He was simply saying something he had thought. "Eleanor knew these suppliers by their first names," Maria said. "Give me 6 months." He looked at her. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but something adjacent to it. Something that had not been on his face, in any form, in any of their interactions up until this moment. "Yes," he said. 6 months. She put her coat on and walked back to the cottage in the cold night. The stars were out, and the air was sharp, and the sound of the cattle in the far pasture was a low, steady sound in the dark. She thought about something on the walk back. She thought about the feed situation, about the 2 hours of work, about the solution. But she also thought about the 2 hours before she had found out there was a problem. The soup, the children doing their homework at the kitchen table, Rosie already asleep with her shoes still on, the wood stove breathing steadily. It had felt like an ordinary evening. Not a careful, managed, surviving evening. An ordinary one. She thought about the ring. She had moved it from her coat pocket to the dresser drawer in the cottage bedroom on the day they moved in. The same kind of drawer, but a different house. She had opened the drawer twice since then, not to look at the ring particularly, but because she kept the drawer for important things. The photograph of her mother and the children's birth documents and the signed contract with Callaway Creek Ranch. The ring lay beside these things. One morning, about 3 weeks in, Marcus had come into her room early and opened the drawer by accident. He thought it was the wrong drawer and was looking for a pen. He had seen the ring. He had looked at it for a moment, closed the drawer, and left without saying anything. Later that evening he came back and knocked on the bedroom doorframe. "Grandma Irene's ring?" he said. "Yes," she said. He nodded. "Good that you still have it," he said. She had thought about this for days afterward. Good that you still have it, not good that you didn't sell it, not good that you were saved, just good that you still have it. As if the ring's continuing presence in the drawer was simply the correct order of things. The day after the feed crisis, Claire called Maria's phone in the afternoon. "I heard there was a problem with Hartfield Supply," she said. "There was," Maria said. "It's handled." A pause. "He told me you sorted it in 2 hours," Claire said. "About that," Maria said. Another pause. "The last time something like this happened, about 2 years ago, it took my mother 3 hours and she'd been managing that relationship for 15 years. She stopped. I'm not saying that to compare, I wanted to say well done." Maria was at the desk in the main house, organizing the follow-up correspondence from the night before. "Thank you, Claire," she said. "I'm coming this weekend," Claire said. "I'm going to bring pecan wood for the cottage stove. It burns longer than the oak." "That would be helpful," Maria said. "And I'll bring lunch," Claire said. "You don't have to make anything." There was something different in her voice now. Not warmer, exactly. Claire was not built for warm in the obvious sense, but less guarded, less measuring. "I'll make something anyway," Maria said. "I like to cook when there's something to cook for." A silence. "My mother was that way," Claire said. "I know," Maria said. "He told you," Claire said. She sounded faintly surprised. "Not directly," Maria said, "but I can see it in the kitchen, in how it's organized and what's stocked and what isn't. Someone cooked in that kitchen who cooked for people, not just for meals." The silence this time was longer. "Sunday at noon," Claire said. "Sunday at noon," Maria said. She hung up and looked out the kitchen window at the paddock, where Hank was with Marcus, moving Patience slowly around the perimeter. Marcus was beside the horse on the right side, his hand flat on her flank, his walk matching hers. She watched them for a moment. Then she turned back to the desk and kept working. Sunday came with a cleaner sky than the week had managed, and the temperature climbed enough by mid-morning that the frost on the cottage porch had melted by the time anyone walked out onto it. Maria had been cooking since 9. She had made the things she knew well: a pot of slow-cooked chicken with vegetables from the preserved stores in the cottage's small pantry, a pan of cornbread that came out the right color, a salad from the last of the winter greens she had found growing in the sheltered side of the garden bed, which had survived the cold under a covering of straw that someone, she assumed Eleanor, had put down the autumn before and never removed. The children were in various states of readiness. Danny had changed his shirt twice, which was unusual enough that Marcus noticed it and said something about it, which Danny loudly denied was relevant. Rosie was on the porch with her collection of stones, which now numbered 7 and had been arranged in an order that made sense to her and to no one else. Marcus was at the paddock. He was always at the paddock on weekends when Hank allowed it. Claire arrived at 11:45 in the white pickup truck, driving the same way she always drove, as if time was a resource she respected too much to waste. She had a bag of pecan wood in the truck bed, which Marcus appeared at the right moment to help unload, because Marcus always appeared at the right moment for physical tasks. He had a talent for timing that looked, to anyone watching, like helpfulness but was actually something more considered. He noticed what needed doing before he was asked. He had been doing this since February. Claire looked at him as he carried the wood to the porch. He was 14, but he was not small for his age, and he moved with the efficiency of someone who had been carrying real things for real reasons. "You look like your mother," she said. Marcus glanced at her. "People say that," he said. "Is it a problem?" "No," he said. "She's good looking." Claire made a sound that was, unmistakably, a laugh. It was brief and surprised her, you could tell, but it was real. Hank arrived at noon, on time the way he was always on time, which was a quality Maria had noticed, and filed away as one of his reliable ones. He knocked on the cottage door even though the door was open, which was another quality. The cottage table had been extended with a board Maria had found in the shed, and cleaned and covered with a cloth. It was not elegant, but it was enough. There were 5 plates and a 6th at the end for Hank, who had not been formally invited, but whom Maria had set a place for anyway. He looked at the place at the end of the table and then looked at Maria. "You can say no," Maria said. "I don't say no to a meal that smells like that," he said. They sat down, all 6 of them around the table in the small cottage, Hank at one end, Maria at the other, Claire and Marcus on one side, Danny and Rosie on the other. The wood stove was going with the pecan wood, which burned as Claire had promised with a longer, steadier heat than the oak. The meal was good. Maria knew it was good, not because she was proud but because she had made it with attention and with the right things. The chicken had been in the pot since morning. The cornbread had the right amount of sugar, not sweet, just enough. The salad had a dressing she had made from the bottle of cider vinegar in the pantry, and some dry mustard she had found in Eleanor's spice rack. Nobody made a speech about the food. That was not the kind of table it was. People just ate. Hank had seconds of the chicken. He did not say anything about it. He just served himself a second portion without being offered one, which in Maria's experience was the best possible compliment. Danny, who had been very polite and slightly stiff for the first 10 minutes, eventually forgot to be performing and started talking about something that had happened at school. A problem with a science project that had required him to calculate the weight a bridge could hold, and how he had gotten the answer wrong and then figured out why he had gotten it wrong, which was more interesting to him than the right answer. He talked about this with his hands, the way he always talked about things that interested him. Claire listened to this with an expression that moved from polite attention to genuine interest. "How did you figure out the error?" she said. Danny told her. He explained it precisely, in the organized way he had with things that were mathematical and concrete. Claire asked one sharp follow-up question. Danny answered it. Claire nodded and said, "So you accounted for the span-to-depth ratio but not the load distribution across the anchor points." Danny stared at her. "You know about bridge loads?" "I'm a structural engineer," Claire said. Danny continued to stare at her. "She builds things," Marcus said from across the table. "I know what a structural engineer does," Danny said, with some dignity. He looked at Claire. "Can I ask you about the anchor point problem?" "After lunch," Claire said. Rosie, across the table, was eating her cornbread in very small pieces, placing each one in her mouth with great care. She had been observing Claire with her usual unblinking attention throughout the meal. "Claire," Rosie said. "Yes," Claire said. "Did you used to live in the cottage?" The table was briefly quiet in the particular way it goes quiet when a child says something that lands in a complicated place. Claire looked at Rosie. She did not hesitate. "I did," she said, "when I was very small." "And then you moved to the big house?" "And then I grew up and moved to Austin," Claire said. Rosie considered this. "Do you miss it? The cottage?" "Yes." Claire looked at the walls of the cottage around her, the scrubbed wooden surfaces and the large windows, and the drawings on the refrigerator, and the porch beyond the open door with Rosie's 7 stones on the shelf. "Sometimes," she said, "but it looks better now than when I was here." Rosie seemed satisfied with this. She went back to her cornbread. After lunch, Danny sat with Claire at the table for half an hour, with a piece of paper and a pen, and went through the bridge project in detail. She drew a diagram for him. He asked questions, she answered them. He argued with one of her points, politely, and she reconsidered it and told him his argument was partially right. Hank and Maria sat on the porch in the thin winter sun. They had their coffees. The cattle were visible in the far pasture, moving in the slow, unhurried way cattle had. Marcus had gone back to the paddock. Rosie had fallen asleep on the sofa inside. The sound of Claire and Danny discussing load distribution came quietly through the open door. "She likes your kids," Hank said. He said it as if it mildly surprised him. "Yes," Maria said. "I think she does." "She doesn't like many people quickly," he said. "She takes after me that way." "I noticed," Maria said. He was quiet. Maria drank her coffee. She looked at the land. The pecan wood in the stove was making the cottage warm in a thorough, even way, not the uneven heat the oak had given. She could feel the difference even out here on the porch. "I want to tell you something," Hank said. "Go ahead," Maria said. He was quiet for a moment. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "I have not talked very much about Eleanor since she died," he said. "Claire has been worried about that. She thinks it's not healthy to keep it all in one place." He paused. "She's probably right. She usually is." Maria said nothing. She waited. Eleanor grew up in a family that didn't have much, Hank said. Her father worked on a crew and her mother cleaned houses. They were not unhappy, her family was a good one, but they were careful with money, and they knew what it meant to not have enough. When Eleanor and I got together and the ranch started doing well, she never forgot that. She gave away more than I ever tracked, and I tracked it enough to know it was a lot. She helped people quietly, without fanfare, the way you help people when you actually understand need, and aren't doing it for the feeling of being seen. He stopped. When I walked into that pawn shop, he said, and I heard what was happening, the first thing I thought was, he stopped again. The first thing I thought was, Eleanor would already be out the door by now. The cold afternoon was very still. Somewhere above the pasture, a hawk was circling. I'm not Eleanor, Hank said. I don't have her ease with people. I don't have her gift for knowing what someone needs and offering exactly that. I think about things for longer than she ever did, and then I act on them more clumsily. He turned the coffee cup again. But I knew enough to know that what I saw in that shop was someone who needed a real option, not a handout. And I knew the ranch needed what that person could give, so I put those two things together. Maria looked at him. His profile was turned toward the pasture. The lines around his eyes were deep and clear in the winter light. Do you know what the thing is, she said, that made the difference? Not just the offer, but the difference between the offer feeling possible and feeling impossible? He looked at her. You didn't look sorry for me, she said. You asked me questions. You treated me like someone you needed to learn about in order to make a practical decision, not like someone who needed to be helped. He was quiet for a moment. I wasn't sorry for you, he said. I was concerned. Those aren't the same thing. No, Maria said. They're not. The hawk had descended slightly and was banking slowly against the pale sky. Rosie's voice came from inside. She had woken up and was asking Danny something. Claire's voice answered instead of Danny's, which meant Danny had moved somewhere else and Claire had stayed at the table. That, Maria thought, was a small thing that meant a great deal. Hank, she said. Yes. Your wife sounds like someone I would have liked very much. He looked at his coffee cup. He did not speak for a moment. Then he said, she would have liked you. She had a very good eye. He stood up and took his cup and went inside. Through the window, Maria watched him stop at the kitchen table, look at the diagram Claire had drawn for Danny's bridge project, say something she couldn't hear. Claire looked up and said something back. He put his hand briefly on her shoulder, a light touch, just a moment, and then went to the stove and poured himself more coffee. Maria sat on the porch alone for a little while longer. The hawk had gone. The cattle were still in the far pasture. The pecan wood was burning in the stove and the heat of it reached her even here. She thought about the ring in the drawer. She thought about what it had almost become, and what it still was. January came around again. A full year. Maria stood in the kitchen of the cottage in the early morning and felt it land. The specific weight of a year passed and accounted for. She was not the kind of person who marked time with celebrations. She was the kind who marked it with acknowledgement, quietly, and then moved on. But this particular morning she allowed herself to stay in the feeling longer than usual. She looked around the cottage kitchen. It was different now from the kitchen she had walked into on that first morning. It was not different in its bones. The stove and the sink and the counter were the same. But it had a lived-in quality now that was specific to her family. Rosie's drawings were still on the refrigerator, joined by a dozen others, the collection rotating as she made new ones and retired old ones. Danny's school schedule was pinned on the corkboard above the counter. Marcus had fixed the handle on one of the cabinet doors. It had come loose in October and he had tightened it with a screwdriver from the tool shed and painted the screw a matching color, which she had not asked him to do. He had just done it. The wood stove was going with pecan wood, which was now the wood she used every night. Claire had brought more in November and again in December. She had started arriving roughly once a month, without announcement, and the visits had shifted from the careful, measured quality they had at the start into something more ordinary. She came, she helped with whatever needed helping with, she ate with them, and she went back to Austin. Once she had stayed overnight, sleeping on the sofa because she had arrived too late to drive back. Maria had given her a blanket from the bedroom and Claire had fallen asleep in minutes, which suggested she had been more tired than she let on. The year had not been without difficulty. There had been the problem with the fence line in March, which had let 3 cattle onto the county road, and required a morning of activity that Maria had helped coordinate from the main house, while keeping the suppliers informed and the paperwork accurate. There had been the broken water heater in the cottage in May, which had led to 3 cold days before the plumber could come, and during which Danny had complained precisely and specifically about each shower, until Marcus told him to be quiet, which did not improve things immediately but did lead to a negotiated system of hot water use that Marcus, being Marcus, had written out and posted on the bathroom wall. There had been the afternoon in August when Hank had been thrown by a horse, not seriously, but he had hit the paddock fence and bruised 2 ribs, and Maria had driven him to the nearest clinic 20 minutes away, while Marcus handled the paddock, and Danny called Claire and Rosie asked every question she could think of about what happened to ribs when they were bruised. Hank had sat in the passenger seat of her car for that drive in a rigid and private kind of pain, and had said almost nothing, and Maria had said almost nothing either. And when they got to the clinic, she had told him to wait while she went ahead to tell them what had happened, and she had done this quickly and accurately and without fuss. And when he had finally been seen and released with instructions and medication, he had looked at her in the waiting room and said, "Thank you," in a tone that meant more than those 2 words. She had said, "You're welcome," and driven him home and made him eat something and not said anything else about it. Now it was January again. 1 year. She opened the dresser drawer and took out the ring. She had not taken it out since the move, except to look at it once in the spring when she had been sorting through the drawer. She had looked at it for a moment and put it back. The time hadn't been right. Now she stood in the kitchen with the ring in her hand and looked at it. The pale green stone caught the morning light from the window. The gold of the band was its usual warm color, unchanged. She had thought about what to do with it for a while. In the quiet way she thought about things that mattered, not with urgency, but with the slow attention of someone who knows the answer will come when it is ready. It had come 3 weeks ago. She had been watching Rosie at the kitchen table working through a math problem with Gloria, and Gloria had made a comment about how Rosie attacked every problem, as if the answer was already in there and just needed to be found. And Rosie had looked up and said, with the directness of a 7-year-old who had thought about something, "Things that are already in there just need the right moment." Maria had stood very still for a second. She had gone to the dresser drawer that evening. The right moment, she had understood, was this one, not the middle of the hard time, not the relief of the first good day, but a year later, when things were real and steady and known, when she could look at what she was putting in Rosie's hands and have it mean something. She put the ring back in the soft cloth. She wrapped it carefully. Then she went to the living room, where the gift box was, a small wooden box that Marcus had made in his school's woodworking class. He had made it in November without telling her why, just as a project, and brought it home and left it on the kitchen counter. It was smooth and properly joined and smelled of fresh wood. He had drilled a small hinge for the lid. It was an excellent box. When she had asked him what it was for, he had shrugged and said he wasn't sure yet. She had known then. She put the wrapped ring inside the box. She closed the lid. She had sent a message to Marcus the evening before, asking him to keep the morning free and to tell Danny that there was something happening. She had not said what. She trusted him to handle it the right way, which he did. By 9 in the morning, all 3 children were in the cottage. Danny was at the kitchen table eating toast with an air of controlled curiosity. Marcus was standing near the door in the way he stood when he was paying attention, but did not want to seem like he was waiting. Rosie was on the porch, sitting on the step, watching the morning. Maria came out with the wooden box and sat on the porch step beside Rosie. Rosie looked at the box. She did not ask what it was. She waited. "A year ago today," Maria said, "we got in the car and we drove here for the first time." Rosie looked at her. "And the year before that, we were in our apartment," Maria said, "and I was going to sell something that belonged to your grandmother." Rosie knew about Irene Delgado. She knew the photograph on the dresser, the story of the garden, the name that Maria used when she spoke about her mother. She was young, but she was not unaware. "The ring?" Rosie said. "She said it the way you say something when you have heard it mentioned before and understood more of it than people expected you to." "The ring," Maria said. She opened the box. Rosie looked at it. She did not reach out immediately. She looked at the pale green stone in the pale morning light. She looked at the gold of the band. "It was hers," Rosie said. "It was your grandmother's," Maria said. "She wore it every day. It was the most important thing she owned, not because of what it's worth, it's not worth a great deal of money, but because she chose it, and she wore it, and it was hers." Rosie reached out one finger and touched the edge of the stone very lightly. "I almost sold it," Maria said. She said it simply and without drama. She wanted Rosie to know the truth of it, even at 7. "We needed money, and I was going to sell it. And then things changed, and we came here, and I have kept it ever since, and now it's time for it to belong to someone again." Rosie looked up. "I want you to have it," Maria said. "Not to wear yet, it won't fit you for years, but to keep. It goes from her to me to you, and when you're old enough to wear it, you'll know what it means." Rosie looked at the ring for another moment. Then she held out her hand. Maria placed the ring in her daughter's palm. Rosie closed her fingers around it. She was very careful. She held it with both hands, cupped, the way you hold something you understand is important. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The morning was cold and clear. Somewhere in the direction of the main house, one of the horses was moving in the paddock. The sound of the pecan wood settling in the stove came through the open door. Marcus came out onto the porch. He stood above them and looked at what Rosie was holding. He said nothing. He just stood there for a moment and looked at his sister's cupped hands and the ring inside them. Then he went back inside and said something to Danny in a low voice, and Danny came to the doorway and looked too. Rosie looked at her brothers. Then she looked at her mother. "I'll keep it safe," she said. "I know," Maria said. "You're very good at keeping things safe." Rosie nodded, as if this was a known fact about herself. "Can I put it in the box?" she said. "It's your box," Maria said. "Marcus made it for you." Rosie turned and looked at Marcus. He was leaning in the doorway now, arms folded, looking in another direction, very deliberately not making anything of the moment. "Thank you," Rosie told him. "It's just a box," he said to the paddock. "It's a good box," Rosie said. She put the ring back in the cloth and placed it carefully in the wooden box and closed the lid. Then she stood up and went inside, and Maria could hear her settling it somewhere specific, somewhere she had thought about, somewhere that was right. Maria sat on the porch alone for a moment. She looked at the land. The January morning was the same cold, clear blue it had been a year ago. The grass was the same winter yellow. The sky was the same wide, honest pale. But everything else was different. She was different. Her children were different. The fear that had been sitting inside her chest for so long, that specific, physical weight, was not there. In its place was something she had not had room for in a very long time. Something she had almost forgotten the shape of. She was planning, not surviving. She was thinking about spring, about the garden, about a seed catalog she had found in Eleanor's kitchen shelf, and asked Hank if she could use. She was thinking about Marcus and the conversation she had with him the night before about colleges. Not imminently, he was only 15 now, but eventually, seriously. She was thinking about Rosie's reading and what Gloria had said about getting her tested for an accelerated program. She was thinking about the community work that she and Hank had talked about, the outreach that Eleanor used to do, the families in the county who needed exactly the kind of help that no official program ever quite reached. She had been thinking about organizing it, formalizing it, making it something that outlasted any one person. She and Hank had not had the full conversation yet, but they had started it. And she knew, from 6 months of working beside him and learning how he thought, that when they did have the full conversation, it would go forward and not back. She stood up from the porch step, picked up her coffee cup, and went inside. On the refrigerator, among Rosie's drawings and Danny's schedule, there was a new thing pinned with a magnet. It was a photograph, taken by Claire on her disposable camera in November, and developed at the drugstore, and brought back on her last visit, and left on the counter without comment. It was a photograph of the 5 of them at the Sunday lunch table, Hank at one end, Maria at the other, Claire and Marcus on one side, Danny and Rosie on the other. Someone had said something just before Claire took the shot, and everyone at the table was in various states of reaction. Hank was looking down with what was almost a smile, Marcus was saying something with his hands, Danny was mid-laugh, Rosie was watching everyone with her calm, dark eyes. Maria looked at the photograph every morning. Every morning it told her the same thing, that the moment she had come closest to losing the ring was the moment that had led her here, that the thing she had been trying to save, in that pawn shop, was not the ring, it was this. 3 years after the morning in the pawn shop, a journalist named Paul Whitmore came to Callaway Creek Ranch. He was not a famous journalist. He worked for a regional paper that covered 4 counties and had a readership of roughly 40,000, and a website that had, on its best weeks, somewhat more. He was 42 years old, with a careful manner and a notebook he preferred to a voice recorder, and he had heard about the ranch through a woman he had been interviewing for a different story, a woman named Brenda who had 3 children and a difficult situation, and who had received help from something called the Callaway Creek Community Fund, and who had told him, simply and directly, that it had changed her life. He had called the ranch number and spoken to Maria, who had told him they would think about it. She and Hank had thought about it for 2 weeks. Hank had been the skeptical one. He did not trust the way stories got told, he said, and he did not want what they were doing reduced to something that would photograph well and read easily and miss the point. Maria had said she understood that, and had also said that the families the fund had helped might benefit from more awareness, that more people knowing might mean more people giving, that the work was not secret and did not need to be protected from attention, only from misrepresentation. "What's the difference?" Hank had said. "The difference is whether you let him ask questions or whether you let him write what he already thinks, Maria said. He had looked at her. Tell him to come, he said. You talk to him. She had called Paul Whitmore back and told him he could come on a Wednesday afternoon in late October, that he would have 2 hours, and that she would answer any factual questions, but that the people the fund had helped would speak for themselves or not at all. She would not be speaking on their behalf. He agreed to these terms. He came on a gray October Wednesday in his own car, a compact with a cracked side mirror, and parked neatly near the main house. He was polite at the door and looked around the kitchen with the quick, quiet attention of someone who notices things. Maria sat across from him at the kitchen table. She had made coffee. She did not offer it. He poured himself a cup when she indicated the pot, which was, she felt, the right kind of person. He asked about the fund. She told him what it was, a structured account, organized by her, with oversight from a local accountant, and accountability to a small board of 3 people, including Claire. She told him how it worked. Families in the county who fell into a specific category of need, identified through referrals from schools and churches and clinics, were given direct financial assistance and, when relevant, connections to more stable work or housing options. How many families in 3 years? He asked. 11, she said. And what does direct financial assistance look like? It looks like what the family needs, she said. For some people, that's rent for 2 months. For others, it's a vehicle repair that means they can keep their job. For one family last year, it was school supplies for 4 children, because without them, the children were going to fall behind and the falling behind was going to become permanent. He was writing in his notebook. He had a small, economical handwriting. How is the fund supported? He asked. 3 sources, she said. Callaway Creek Ranch contributes a set amount each quarter. A group of 12 individuals in the county contribute monthly. And there are occasional larger gifts from people who hear about the work and want to be part of it. How do people hear about it? Word of mouth, she said. Mostly. He looked up. Like Brenda, he said. Like Brenda, Maria said. He looked at his notebook. Can I ask how this started? He said. The fund, specifically. Maria looked at him. She had thought about how to answer this question. It started with a conversation, she said, between me and the man who owns this ranch, about something his wife used to do, and about what it would mean to keep doing it in a way that was organized enough to last beyond one person's energy. Henry Callaway, the journalist said. Hank, Maria said. Is he here today? He's out with the horses, Maria said. He said he might stop in at some point, he might not. As if on schedule, though it was not, because Hank was not that deliberate about these things. The back door opened and Hank came in. He had his hat in his hand and mud on his boots, and he looked at Paul Whitmore with the flat, patient expression he gave to strangers who were in his kitchen. Hank, Maria said, this is Paul Whitmore. He's writing about the fund. Hank looked at the journalist. The journalist looked at Hank. You're the rancher, Paul said. That's right, Hank said. Can I ask you a few questions? Hank went to the coffee pot. He poured a cup. He turned around and leaned against the counter in the way he leaned against things when he was deciding something. You can ask, he said. Paul asked him about the fund, about where the idea came from, about what he had seen in 3 years of it running. Hank gave short answers, not unhelpful but not expansive. He confirmed the facts. He did not editorialize. Then Paul asked the question that Maria had known he would ask, because it was the natural question for a journalist to ask, and the one that would be at the center of whatever he wrote. What made you start this? Paul said. He looked at Hank directly. Not the formal fund, but the original decision. What made you get involved? Hank held his coffee cup. He looked at it. The kitchen was quiet. Through the window you could see the paddock. Marcus was out there. He was 16 now, and had been working with the horses seriously enough that Hank paid him a small wage for Saturday mornings, which was the kind of arrangement Marcus had been working toward without ever saying so directly. Through the window you could see him moving patients around the perimeter in the easy, practiced way that came from 2 years of daily attention. I was picking up a watch, Hank said. Paul Whitmore looked at him. He waited. I went to the pawn shop in town to pick up a watch I'd left for repair, Hank said. While I was in there, I heard a woman at the counter. She was about to sell the only thing she had left. He stopped. Her children were outside. Her little girl was hungry. She wasn't asking for anyone's help. She was just trying to solve a problem with the only thing she had available. He stopped again. What did you do? Paul said. I told the shop owner not to buy the ring, Hank said. Paul was writing. And then? He said. And then I thought about it for a minute, Hank said. And I offered her a job. Paul looked up from his notebook. Why? He said. The question landed in the kitchen and sat there. Hank turned his coffee cup in his hands. My wife would have done it in 2 minutes, he said. I took about 10, but I got there. Paul wrote that down. He looked up. And the woman in the pawn shop, he said carefully. Would that be Mrs. Delgado? Yes, Hank said. He looked at Maria across the table. Maria looked back. She runs the fund, Hank said, and the ranch's administration, and about 40 other things I have no talent for. Paul Whitmore wrote something in his notebook. Then he looked up at Hank and said, What would you say is the most important thing? The lesson, maybe, from everything that's happened in the last 3 years. Hank was quiet for a long time, long enough that Paul's pen waited, not writing. I didn't stop, Hank said finally. That's all. I didn't keep walking past something I'd seen clearly. Paul wrote that down. He looked at it. He underlined it. That's what you want in the article? He said. I don't want anything in the article, Hank said. But if you're asking what's true, that's what's true. Most of the time when people don't help, it's not because they're bad people. It's because they kept walking. I just didn't. He finished his coffee, put the cup in the sink, picked up his hat, and went back out through the door. Paul Whitmore sat for a moment. He looked at the closed door. He looked at his notebook. He looked at Maria. He's something, he said. He is, Maria said. Are you willing to talk about your side of it? He said. The pawn shop, the beginning. Maria looked at him. She thought about that morning. The cold walk, the children on the bench, the way she had placed the ring on the scratched glass counter and watched Mr. Briggs examine it, and heard the number 40, and stood there not being able to make herself agree even though she had already decided to. She thought about the bell above the door, the boots on the wooden floor, the words, "Don't buy that ring." Yes, she said. I'll tell you about it. She told him the whole thing. She told it the way she had come to tell it in her own mind, plainly, without drama, without making it smaller than it was, or larger than it was. She told him about the ring and the $40 and the hunger and the apartment and Carl leaving and the 6 months of keeping it together on the outside while the inside fell apart. She told him about the diner and the hot chocolates and Rosie pressing the marshmallow into her cup. She told him about the cottage and the contract and George Ferris at the legal aid office with his 3 careful notes. She told him about moving day and the neighbor named Ed asking if she was going somewhere better. She told him about the first morning at the desk in the main house, about Eleanor's notes on the bulletin board and the preserved peaches on the shelf, about the feed crisis and the 2 hours and what Hank had said afterward, about Claire and the wood stove draft and the pecan wood. She told him about the fund, where the idea had come from, how she had shaped it, what it meant now. Paul Whitmore wrote almost without stopping. When she finished, he put his pen down. He looked at his notebook and then at her. The ring, he said. What happened to it? I kept it, she said, and then last January I gave it to Rosie. How old is she now? She's 8. Does she understand what it is? She understands more than most people twice her age, Maria said. She knows it was her grandmother's. She knows I almost sold it. She knows why I kept it. She paused. She keeps it in a wooden box that Marcus made. She takes it out sometimes and looks at it, and then she puts it back. Why did you wait to give it to her? Paul said. Why not sooner? Maria thought about this. Because the right moment matters, she said. Not the moment of relief, and not the moment of crisis. The moment when you can look at the thing clearly and put it in someone's hands, and have the weight of it be exactly right. Paul Whitmore looked at her for a moment. Then he closed his notebook. The article ran 3 weeks later. It was a good article, careful, specific, honest. It did not make the story more dramatic than it was, which was the thing Maria had been most concerned about, and it did not make Hank into something he was not. It described the fund accurately, and included the contact information for people who wanted to contribute. Within 2 weeks of publication, 5 new monthly contributors had signed on. Brenda, the woman who had first told Paul Whitmore about the fund, called Maria after the article ran. She said she was glad it was out there. She said some things needed to be known. Maria thought about this. She thought about what needed to be known. Not the charity, not the transaction, not the drama of a woman almost selling her mother's ring in a cold pawn shop on a winter morning. What needed to be known was the smaller thing underneath it. The thing that was not dramatic at all. A man who could have kept walking. Didn't. A woman who could have accepted $40. Didn't. And everything, every single thing that came after, followed from those 2 moments of not doing the easier thing. Rosie was in the school's accelerated reading program now. She read things that made adults look twice when they saw them on the shelf. She still collected stones and kept them on the porch, and the collection now stretched along the entire east shelf and had begun to spill, with complete unapologetically, onto the main shelf too. Danny had gone back to Paul Whitmore's article and read the section about the bridge load problem, the one Claire had helped him with, and had not liked the way it was written, and had said so in a detailed letter to the paper. The paper had published his letter. He was 11, and his letter was published in a regional newspaper, and he was deeply satisfied by this. Marcus had spent a Saturday morning in October helping Hank with a difficult fence repair in the east pasture, a real job, not an after-school activity, and Hank had paid him a full day's wage for it. Marcus had said thank you and put the money in an envelope and not touched it. Maria had not asked what the envelope was for. She knew he would tell her when it was relevant. That evening, the 3 children and Maria sat on the cottage porch in the last of the October light. The pecan wood was going in the stove behind them. The sky above the ranch was doing the thing it did some evenings, going very precisely through its colors, from pale blue to amber to something that was briefly and only in that place a particular shade of orange that had no name. Rosie was on the step with her stone collection, rearranging it the way she always was. Danny was reading. Marcus was sitting on the chair with his feet up on the railing, looking at the sky. "Marcus," Rosie said. "Yes," he said, without looking away from the sky. "When I'm old enough to wear the ring," she said, "do you think it'll still fit?" Marcus looked down at her. "Rings can be sized," he said. "Oh," Rosie said. She considered this. "Good." Marcus went back to looking at the sky. Maria sat in the other chair and looked at the land and felt the warmth of the wood stove at her back. The evening was settling in. Hank's kitchen light was on in the main house up the track. She could see it from here, the warm rectangle of it in the growing dark. She thought about nothing in particular for a while. That was new. For a very long time, sitting still had meant the thoughts catching up with her, the fear, the calculations, the endless adding up of what was owed and what was left and what came next. Now sitting still just meant sitting still. The light in Hank's kitchen stayed on. The cattle in the far pasture moved slowly toward the shelter of the tree line. The sky went through its last colors and began to darken. Rosie found a new stone at the edge of the porch and held it up to what remained of the light. "Mama," she said, "is this one good?" Maria looked at it. It was a flat gray oval, smooth on one side and rough on the other. It was a perfectly ordinary stone. "Yes," she said, "it's a good one." Rosie placed it carefully at the end of the row. The light in the main house stayed on. The evening came in. The wood stove breathed. The ranch settled into its night, and the family settled with it, and the dark came down over Callaway Creek the way the dark always came, slowly, then all at once, then complete.